Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here on the xisumasays channel. I'm going to talk to you for a little bit about my thoughts and opinions on what's happening in America right now. If you are out of the loop, then I would recommend perhaps going and looking at the news and being informed. And as always, when I talk about these things, I like to be very transparent about what I know. So I've probably spent a limited amount of time learning about what's going on over there. And the point of being transparent and talking about my thoughts and opinions and this stuff is I think it's really valuable to contribute to the conversations around topics like this about things happening in our world, is to fully divulge the thoughts, the reasoning behind these things in order to educate one another, and so we can understand different viewpoints and have different perspectives on what is going on. So I kind of have a surface image of this man who has been tragically killed by the police and the response to it, and I'm just going to talk to you about some of my thoughts around when things like this happen. So I want to start off with a quote from MLK about riots. That's Martin Luther King. This quote has always stuck in my mind, and I think it's really, really insightful. So MLK said, "I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. But in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear?" Those are very powerful words, so brilliantly articulated, and I've thought over that quote many times over the years, especially quite a few years ago now, maybe 10 years ago, when we had riots in London and across the UK when David Cameron was president, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. But let's think about what he said about certain conditions needing to be there, and let's think about them in a physical context. So imagine you've got an old rusty pipe in your house and one day it bursts and floods. Now, the conditions for that to happen require the pipe to be capable of bursting and then flooding. So if you had an indestructible type of pipe that would never burst, then those things could never happen, right? And the reason I bring up an example like that is to relate the physical world to the, let's say, moralistic and personal world of people partaking in particular actions, i.e. riots in the world. So, you know, there is no equality at birth. We don't all start off at the same place in society. And so where you are geographically or economically, there are many forces beyond those two as well that shape you as a person and shape your experiences and your potential to then participate in something like a riot. So going back to David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, in response to the riots that outbroke, he called the people that were rioting mindless thugs and condemned the riots. Now, riots, in all fairness, should be condemned. We don't condemn these actions, but as MLK points out, we also then need to look at what is underneath them, which is something David Cameron didn't appear to be doing. He just wanted to condemn the riots that were taking place and moved on. And although over here, if I remember correctly, it was a similar incident of a man of color, something happened involving the police, but there was also an atmosphere around the nature of the riots that showed that it wasn't just about that. People were being opportunistic and looting and stealing things. And so to relate that physical idea of the pipe bursting to the riots that I saw happen here in this country 10 years ago, you know, if those people were out looting during the riot and taking televisions or whatever, if they had mansions with televisions in and they were sitting on a fortune of wealth, do you think they would go out and riot and risk getting arrested and, you know, having their life turned upside down? It's people that will have more need for those things, or the necessity or the desires for material wealth because of a lack of it, that would be more likely to go and partake in these actions. And so that's the way that I like to frame looking at this, is that realizing that there is underlying conditions that lead to these actions happening. So turning back to the original point of this video, which is George Floyd and how he's been murdered by a police, or depending on how you look at it, several police all at once. There is a video of this man on the ground with a with a knee in his neck saying, "I can't breathe," and it is just an unbelievably excessive use of force that is clearly crossing a line, and I really haven't seen any arguments online that would persuade me this is not murder and that these people should be held responsible for their actions and should not be protected by the fact that they are police. And I saw an interesting comment going around on Twitter, someone pointing out that if there is a paedophile among a schooling community, the schooling community of teachers do not rally around that person to protect them. They, call them out and make sure they are prosecuted and dealt with and kept away from children. I believe we should do something similar with policing. If we have police who abuse their power like this person clearly had done, they should not be protected. We need to set an example for other police. And one of the unfortunate things about situations like this is that the incident creates tension towards police as a whole, and I bet you there are so many good police out there who do great things for their communities and who are good and decent people, and it only ever takes a small minority, an instance like this, to paint them in a bad light. But again, the idea of protecting them because they're police to me is absurd, and it looks like this is a tipping point where in the past we've seen incidences like Rodney King, for example. The police get away with these actions that they're caught doing, and over time these incidents occur again and again, and it seems like this might be a tipping point, as apparently they're going to be prosecuted and charged, which I think is the right thing to do. Now, I also want to comment on the racial aspect of this, because he was a black man, and the fact that he's black, I believe, stirs up a lot of the tensions inside of the black communities and people who care about those communities, myself included. Being someone who has looked into history, I'm very curious about the past and how we've got from there to here. When I go back and I look at the history in America, the amount of racism and how long it's taken to get from where it once was with slavery to where we are today is quite incredible. If you were to go back, 110, 20 years and see what the most left-leaning presidential figure or politician would say about black people compared to today, they would almost look like someone on the extreme right. And it shows you that progression has been made over time. However, there is obviously still further to go. And this is one of those things that seems to really divide people when you start to get into race. And the way that I look at it is that I believe that we should, as a society, aim for equality and do that through equal opportunity for everyone. And I think what sometimes is portrayed is a lack of even-handedness with equality of outcome. So an example of what I'm talking about is reparations, and I don't fully understand the ins and outs of that term, but the idea is that people who have been wronged in the past then get, like, let's say, a check for money in an attempt to amend the wrongdoing. And there's plenty of evidence out there, again, historical, that, slavery that happened hundreds of years ago has ripples through time that are still affecting people to this day. I wholeheartedly believe that that is the case in American society. But to step back from the race issue a little bit, the problem is that if you were to then go and pay reparations to the black community for slavery, there will be people in society who will feel like they are economically disadvantaged in a similar way to those people, and they don't receive a check as well. So the way that I look at these situations is that we should be trying to pull all people up to a higher standard together to eliminate these problems. So to make it clear, I'm not trying to say that there isn't a wrong that needs to be righted, but when we focus in on a certain area of society, in this case ethnicity, there are people left outside of wherever we're focusing our attention that are also disadvantaged and struggling in society. And that's why I believe that we need to, although this is obviously about race, we need to deal with things almost as if it wasn't, in order to make everything better for everyone. So the death, or we could say murder, of George Floyd is obviously tragic, and the nature of it being 4 white police officers abusing their power over this one black man makes it more tragic for so many. The thing that I'd like to just think about for a moment here is imagining a world where there isn't police brutality and incidences like this never happen. Now, historically speaking, it could still be about race, but if police brutality was never something that happened, then it could never be about race. And so when dealing with these issues, I always look at a solution that almost isn't about race being a response to the problem of race in these situations. If we ever got to a more utopian vision of society where, you know, money was never a problem, everyone was fed, housed, and looked after, it would be harder to then make big deals out of race, because, you know, inequality is usually where these issues stem from, right? And so I think that the way to move forward from situations like this is obviously to deal with them, is to talk about it, is to accept that race is an element and bring light to that and explain it, but also to find a solution that isn't unevenly handed to one race over another. It needs to be about removing race entirely from the equation. And the way I would see that being done is that any policeman who uses excessive force is brought to justice, regardless of the color of the individual, the sex of the individual who has been on the end of that abuse of power. So the last couple of days with all of this unfolding, it's been ticking over in my mind, and I wanted to get this off my chest. So thank you for listening, and if you're going to leave a comment down below, remember that social media, and especially places like Twitter and Facebook, are just the most entrenching places for discussion. People so often get pulled into a corner and come out punching from it. So if you want to comment down below, remember to be civil, try and assume positive intent on the other person's behalf. You know, voice is a great way to communicate and articulate a lot of detail. You can hear what someone's saying in the tone of their voice as well, whereas text has that ambiguousness where you can interpretate things negatively. So if you want to chat in the comments down below, just remember that, and try and be as civil with one another, because this is obviously a heated topic. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon in another one. Bye bye.